So one of the questions I got is, what percent of the crime rate is drug related? And what is being done to combat the sale of drugs in the community? I've lived here for less than a year and have watched drug sales activity on my street more than once. Well, first of all, I can tell you that there's a saying, an old saying in police work, that many roads lead back to the drug dealer and the drugs in the community. So it's hard to tell you accurately in any community across the United States how much is related to drugs and not so much. However, we know that burglaries, we know that shoplifting, we know that robberies, many of them are for the purposes of getting money in exchange for drugs. And so I would say that the number would be at least 60%. And this is probably consistent across the state. I can tell you right now, depending on what happens with the state budget and the deals that are made, I can tell you right now that these numbers have potential to be worse, and it really is concerning police chiefs across California. We know that right now, with the situation with the early release of prisoners back into our community, we know that's going to have a significant impact. We'll get a list of the numbers of the impact in this community, but it's really frightening because they're being released back into the community early, and so they haven't done their time. And when you ask a question about drugs, most of them are low-level drug users or drug dealers, because those are considered non-violent, non-sex crimes, and they're being released back. I talked last night about a broken system, and the system is really broken in the state for a lot of different disciplines across the state, but I'm talking about law enforcement. And the piece that's broken is parole reform is broken. They're reforming putting people on parole, and instead of putting them on parole with supervised parole, they're putting them on unsupervised parole with no conditions, no need to report to anyone. So I'm not really sure what kind of parole that is when you really have no conditions and no one to report to. But this is the new parole that they're putting people on. And it's quite concerning to police chiefs because we know that these are nonviolent offenders, but we know they have a potential for being nonviolent. We had an incident in the former community that I worked in of a nonviolent parolee that was released back into the community with no supervision. He committed a home invasion, robbery, and a violent crime. And when we located him, he was armed with many firearms in a hotel room waiting for parole and officers to come, and wasn't going to go without a fight. Thank God we caught him at the perfect time where he went cooperatively. But that is one of the examples and why it's such a concern to law enforcement that these people are being released with little or no supervision in the community. And the broken piece is there's no resources. If you take the time to talk to a parolee that's been released back in the community, even supervised, they're going to tell you they get how much from the state a month, somewhere between $500, $600, and $700 to be put back. We know that housing elements and people that own housing complexes, we know they don't want to rent to a former felon, because if you're on parole, you have a felony conviction. We know that it's hard to get a job with a felony conviction. And so if you talk to the parolees, they're going to tell you, what do they go back to? There's an over 90% recidivism rate with people that have been released back into communities, over 90%. And many of those are related to drugs. So you see the problem with the broken system. When we talk about things that are related to drugs, there's not a specific number, but the number is quite high. And we look in the future of the impact with parole reform and prisoner release, and we're very concerned. The governor's been working with police chiefs across the state, but still, there's not going to be an easy solution on this. So you'll see more to come as we get close to a decision of how that's going to impact the community of San Leandro. So, welcome to San Leandro. You stay more than 2 years. I have committed to 2 years and 1 day. Well, I can tell you that I have many questions of this in a variety of different ways, but the question comes down to, am I going to retire in 2 years? And I know it would be a surprise, but I'm not eligible to retire for many, many years. I believe as a police chief, you're making a commitment to the community. I don't believe it's a fly-by-night job, and I take that commitment very seriously. And so my commitment to the community is to stay to make an impact. I think it's really hard to make an impact when you're here only for a few years. You know, so my commitment to the community is to stay here, make a commitment and make a difference in the community, and also be involved and engaged in the community. So I really think that that goes beyond 2 years. And you're sitting there going, well, you're not answering my question. And so the answer is that I think you need to stay long enough to make a difference, and that's my commitment to the community. So that is many years that I have an attachment to this community, as long as they still want me. This is a personal question, but I think it's a really valid question. As your police chief, you really should know my motivation and why I want to be here. And this is the exact question, was why I wanted to be a police chief in San Leandro. Well, there's many overarching reasons, but I was at a time in my career where I was looking for greater challenges. And one of the things that's very, very unique, and I can't stress, it is highly unique right now, is to find a very unique city like this. And this is really a gem in the Bay Area as cities for a variety of different reasons. It offers many law enforcement challenges that I believe I have experienced that I can make a difference in. As a full service community, there are so many communities that are not offering full service what we're offering. I have a career and a background in prevention and intervention and focusing on that to make a difference as it relates to crime in a community. And I think that that's a perfect fit here. I think I also have the skill set that's a match for this community. The other thing, I mean, I think also it's a larger city than the former city that I worked in. And my experience in community engagement, implementing technology and reducing crime, I think is exactly as I understand what the community was looking for. And so I think that's probably why I was chosen, and it's why I plan to stay here. So those are all the questions that I have.
I actually put up a card, but it didn't have a specific question on it. It was actually a statement. I wanted, number one, to thank you for coming over here and welcome you to San Leandro. You have an excellent police force. And I say that from experience. We live at the corner of Julius and Durant. We're right on the border with Oakland. There have been incidents over there. I'm one of those people. I'm one of the Kravitzes. I'm always watching the street. I have insomnia, so I'm up in the middle of the night looking out just to see what's going on. And from personal experience, we had an 18-month period where at one point I had my beat officer's cell phone number. And I would call him and give him the phone numbers, or the license plate numbers of the vehicles that pulled up. And then I'd go back to bed. And sometimes nothing would happen, and sometimes within 45 minutes we'd have 3 police cars, and they'd be breaking into the garage next door yet again. We had a guy there who was dealing drugs. They were dealing with car burglaries and break-ins, and it took us 18 months because of the way the laws are written and because he lived in the garage, and the people who owned the house, his mom and everything, weren't involved. Your police force was invaluable in getting these people out of there, but it took a lot of work on my part. And I understand they can't do everything. I'm just down the block from the woman who was talking about the 4 break-ins in less than 2 months, right down there. We saw the people, but I think they were one of the smart ones. By the time we figured out what was going on and got all the information to the police, they'd done what they wanted to do, and I haven't seen them since. I haven't seen them in the neighborhood since the last break-in, and it's unfortunate. But yeah, we appreciate the prevention tips and the officers coming out, meeting with our community. We have the phone numbers of our neighbors. We talk to each other on a regular basis, and when we see something, we talk to each other about it. I ask my neighbors if they know who this car is, who it belongs to. And if we don't know who it is, I call it in. I've made some mistakes. I've irritated some neighbors who got their cars written up, but I've also had cars that ended up being stolen, that were found the same day they were stolen because we didn't recognize them. We called them in. And we have prevented burglaries by calling in people who have been felons at large, armed felons at large. I've given a license plate number to the police department, and within 10 minutes, somebody's there, and they've got the car, and there's a policeman on either side, and that person's going to jail just because of paying attention.
Sure.
So thank you for your help.
So thank you, and you know, this goes to our history. It just didn't start in January. We have a history in this department by being very proactive and being engaged. And you know, I'm committed to maintaining that service and really connecting you with the beat officers that are in your area. I'll have to say, just going back to street dealing, is I have driven around since I've been here a lot in town, and I also strayed over the border. And the only reason why I knew I was over the border is a couple things. Is the appearance of the community is sharply different than our community. The second thing is the street dealing is obvious, and so are the street prostitutions. And that's not what you're seeing in our town. But if you do see low-level street exchanges of drugs, I can tell you it's not tolerated. We have 3 people assigned to a special enforcement detail. Just the other day, 5 search warrants, at least 2 arrests, multiple firearms, marijuana grows taken into custody. And we have 3 people that are assigned specifically to go attack those areas. So we do not tolerate street drug dealing, prostitution, street prostitution, and what we really need is you calling and saying, I think this is what it is, let us go out there and look at it. But I thank you for your comments, and I'm getting cut off right now, so. Did you have one more question on my answer? Yes.
I live on Georgia Way, and it's a short block. One side of it is East 14th, the other side of it is Washington School, and it's a dead end. It's just we actually turned out one of the neighbors found out somebody from Megan's List was living on the block.
Megan's Law, right, sex offender.
Right, and so the kids were walking by every day, it was in 50 yards of the school. Is that legal for someone to do that?
This is a very dicey area. Cities have to adopt ordinances to say that the people can't live there because they've made this great law that says you can't live there, and then people live there, and there's no enforcement tool on it. It's really problematic. Some cities like Piedmont have adopted ordinances, but it's hard to get someone to move. And so I can tell you I'm very interested in sex offenders that live in town and that they're not by children and that they comply with the law, which I think right now is 1,000 feet from a school or anywhere children congregate. One thing you can do as a neighbor to be proactive is to send that information out to the PTA, send that information out to your neighbors so they're aware of where this person is living. That information is by law clearly on Megan's Law on the computer. Just go to the California, I think it's Department of Justice, the California State website, go to Megan's Law and pull that information up and put the information out to the communities. The PTA should be very proactive in getting that information out. But I'll have to come back to you to let you know what we're doing specifically in those areas. But the law has some loopholes in it that's causing an enforcement problem for us. But I can tell you that if you have a question about your sex offender, give me an email. My email's on the front of the website. I can look up the name because we want to make sure that they're actively registered, they're in the right place, and they're complying at least with the state requirements that they're supposed to. Some of them are high-risk offenders, and they're on GPS monitoring as well. So if you have suspicions about something, we can pull up the GPS monitoring, either in our detective unit or work with our probation officer to pull it up and see what they're doing. So thank you for bringing that question up. And please send me an email, and we'll just double-check on what we're doing, and I'll get back to you on that.